Check, check, check. Hello, I'm Perry, and we're here a little early, but thank you for coming to the webinar. It's a lovely day here in Chicago, a little chilly, uh, but I'm happy to start with the first new webinar of the new year. I try to do a webinar almost every month. We did 10 last year, so we'll try to do at least that many this year. Sometimes I repeat some things, so if you miss a webinar, I might do a repeat of it, or we certainly do a rebroadcast. Today's webinar is an introduction to cosmetic formulating. So it's more for beginner levels, but there's a lot of nice nuggets for people who have been in formulating for a while. Sorry, I'm just looking at my hair. My wife tells me I need a haircut, and apparently I do. All right, since you're here early, why don't you let me know where you're from? You can look at the box right below this video and let me know. Say hello. Where are you from? Who are you? And if you had a question, feel free to post that question. I'm going to be answering questions at the end of the webinar. So if you have a question along the way, feel free to post it below. Now, if you put a question down now that I was going to already answer in the webinar, I may not get to it right now. Yeah, so let me know where you're from. I'm Perry, and I'm from Chicago in the United States. We've got Evgenia from Greece. Hello, welcome all the way from Greece. Lovely country. I want to get there someday, but I haven't been there yet. To Italy, which was close, but it's not Greece. We did get a few questions sent in prior to the webinar. Maybe I'll cover one of those. It's a question. Well, here was a question from somebody who sent in before the webinar, and I'll just answer it. The name was Mai. And essentially, Mai said, could you send me a recipe to try for preparation of a cream, please? One of the things that you'll note here is that I'm not a depository for formulations. Now, if you want to get free formulations, there's lots of sources for free starting formulations. In fact, if you go into our forum, just look up free formulas. There's a whole list of places to get free formulations. Now, these are free starting formulas, but with any product, you're always going to need a starting formula, and then based on the types of raw materials that you're able to get, you change things up then. But I don't have formulas to just give away. I don't even know. The question is preparation of a cream. There's lots of creams. It really depends on what you're trying to do with the product. So, but you can get formulas. There's lots of places for starting formulas, which I have a link in the chemistcorner.com/forum. You can find the link there. Find free formulas there. All right, we're going to get started in just 10 more minutes. But if you're here, let me know where you're from. Let me know who's here. Say hello. Let's see. We got a few more people here. Angela from Ontario, Canada. I wonder if it's cold up in Canada here. It's minus 20 today. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but it's cold. I went outside for my regular run. I run every single day, and I had to bundle up. It was quite chilly. We have Sarah from Chicago, and she's staying home because of the weather. I'm home, but I'd be home anyway because of the weather. I actually, I did a run outside, and this is, let's see if this translates well. There's the shot of my run outside today. I did like 2 miles, but it was rather chilly. So yes, it's fun. I'm a runner. I'm on a running streak. I never miss a day, and I always do it outside. So that's how I amuse myself. Well, hello, and thank you for coming. Bo from Belgium. Good to see you. Welcome. We have New Brunswick, Canada, Joanne. Hello, Joanne. I'm so glad that you're here. We got Fathana from Singapore. And she said, I have a nice haircut. Well, thank you. It's getting a little shaggy on the sides, but we have Joanna from Toronto. Hello, Toronto. We have a lot of Canadians today. That's great to see. We have Valentina from Macedonia. We have people from all over the world. Hello. Angela says it's -20 there. So very cold and windy. Yeah, it's the same here in Chicago. Lots of fun. All right, we're going to get started in just a few more minutes. But if you have a question, right now is a good time to put it in because you'll be the first on the list when I start going through questions. I've got a number of questions that were sent in previous to the webinar here. And if I don't answer that question on the webinar, I'll respond to you with an email with an answer to that. And I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. Sometimes I don't get to all the questions. Last webinar I had about 150 questions, and I got through a lot of them. I did not get through all of them. So if I didn't get it last time, feel free to post it again. I'll try to get to your questions here. We've got James from the UK, who also says he's currently in the Netherlands. Hello, James. We've got Jackie from Amsterdam. Wow, lots of people from Europe. We've got Canada. We've got Konstantina from Greece. But living in New York right now. Excellent. I'm so glad you guys could all make it. I always have to experiment with what time I do these webinars. Usually I do them like right around this time, or maybe I'll do it earlier. But there are some people in Australia. I can imagine this is like in the middle of the night for them. So maybe next time I will do it at a different time for someone who on the other side of the planet can attend. I can attend live. I have the replay, so if you're not able to see the replay or stay for the whole thing, there will be a replay of this webinar. We've got Kathleen from Ottawa, Ontario. Hello, and Valentina from Macedonia. So we have a good swath of chemists from around the country, and we will get started with the webinar in just 5 minutes. In the meantime, I'll just sip some of my tea. And like I said, if you have questions now, feel free to post them. We'll get started, and then I'll be able to answer those at the end there. Bo says it's 20 p.m. local time, Belgium. So 20 p.m. That's 8 o'clock by my number. So 8 p.m. That's not bad. I've never been to Belgium. Another place that I would like to go. Yeah, been to France. I haven't been to Spain though. I'd like to go to Spain too. Lots of places. You get to travel a bit as a cosmetic chemist, as long as you go to like the In Cosmetic show or visit one of the IFSCC groups around the world. But so I've traveled a little bit as a formulator, but not too much. There's always more places to go. All right, let's see where we are here. We will get started in just 5 minutes. I'm just preparing everything, make sure all the slides are working. Good thing I check, see? Just setting up here. Okay. There we go, we got that. All right, this is the monthly webinar of Formulating. I am Perry Romanowski, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. If you have a question now, or you want to just say hello, hi, tell me where you're from. If you have a question, let's see if we have any questions already thrown in there. Andrea asks about reverse engineering a formula. Well, got a few minutes. Let's talk about reverse engineering a formula. Um, so you need a few things when you're reverse engineering a formula. And let me tell you, initially here, when there's a formula out on the market and you want to copy it, you have no way really, unless you get the formula, you have no way of knowing exactly what that formula is. But so the first thing that you need to do is to get an ingredient list. That's a great place to start. Next step is to figure out where's the 1% line. And the 1% line is just the order. The ingredients have to be listed in order above 1% concentration, and then at 1% and below, they could be listed in any order. So that means the ingredients above the 1% line are in order of concentration. And so once you can narrow it down to those top 5 or 6 ingredients that are in the formula at more than 1%, then you can start to get at a starting formula and guessing at ratios based on use levels of ingredients. You can also get more information about the percent solids in the formula. We actually go through it in our course, a whole step-by-step procedure on how to do it. But basically, you need the ingredient list. If you can get the percent solids, that's good, and you do that just by evaporating off the water. So then you know how much of the formula is not water, and then you just guess at the ratios. Then you make a prototype based on that, see how close it is based on the aesthetics of it, based on the viscosity, the pH, and then you adjust your formulation from there. And so it takes experimenting. There's no simple way to do it, like immediately just to look at an ingredient list and know. But with a few experiments and some raw materials, you can actually get to a pretty good approximation of a formula that's on the market. So hopefully that was helpful. Now, again, when you're reverse engineering something, you may not get exactly the same formula. You may just want to just copy the aesthetics of the formula, and it doesn't really matter if you have exactly the same ingredients. All right, we're going to get started in 2 minutes. Thanks for that question, Andrea. We've got Carolina from Scotland. Hello. We've got Hilal from Turkey. Hello in Turkey. Great. Ken says he initially reported to Gus Feedback. Hey, I know Gus. Yeah, I used to work with Gus. Thanks for coming on board, Ken. Yeah, good old Alberto Culver. I was there for a number of years, and I enjoyed my time there. Gus was there the entire time I was there, and he was still there until the company shut down. He must have been there for like 40 years. Well, thank you for joining. We've got Laura from Arkansas. All right, Arkansas. Excellent little state there. I've driven through it a couple of times. I don't think I've stayed there for any amount of time. We have Nicole from New Zealand. Well, thank you for waking up this early. Hopefully you find it helpful here. Morgan from Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville is a nice city. I stayed over there once on my way to Hilton Head. We drive to places, and it was a nice drive. All right, this webinar, we're going to get started in just 1 minute. But say hello. We've got Claire from New Zealand also. Wow. Welcome here. All right, let me make sure everything's called up here. Take one more sip of my tea. Get the voice ready, and here we go. Welcome to the webinar. I am Perry Romanowski, and you are on the Chemist's Corner monthly webinar. Today's webinar is going to be about beginning cosmetic formulating. And so we're going to go through all the steps of what you need to know to get started formulating. We'll go through the equipment. We'll go through how you get formulas. We'll go through testing, and we'll try to get through it all in 45 minutes. We'll see. At the end, I will stick around and answer whatever questions you have. So if you have questions, look below this video, and you will see a box. And in that box, you can put questions, or you can say hello. Let me know where you're from, who you are. And at the end of it, I will go through and answer questions for a while. I usually The official webinar is done in an hour, but I stick around for an hour and a half. Sometimes I've been as long as 2 hours. But if I don't get to your question on the webinar, leave your email and I will try to get to it through that way. All right, so let's get started. So I need to share the webinar screen. There we are. All right. Now, before we get started, a few housekeeping things. First, you'll see that I told you about asking questions, so you can see that right below the video here. Just expand that video, that box. Okay. Now, I'll answer as many questions as I can. Just try to limit yourself to one question per entry, so it keeps it less confusing for me. I should say that this webinar technology can be a little tricky, so please bear with me if there's any kind of technical glitch. I haven't had one in a while, so hopefully I've got this figured out. All right, thank you for joining this webinar. And I want to tell you about the free gift. I put together this handbook of practical cosmetic formulating tips. There you go. And if you look on the left side of the screen, there's a link to download that. It's just a collection of articles that can make you a better, more effective cosmetic formulator. Lots of practical information about formulating, product evaluation. It's over 100 pages of pure content, and it's yours free just for joining this webinar. So to get that, just click on the link below the video and do it during this webinar because it's not going to be offered outside of this webinar. There's another free resource I want to tell you about. This is the 30 Days to Become a Better Cosmetic Chemist audio course. Now, there's 30 episodes of about 10 to 20 minutes long, and you can listen to them on any podcast playing device or even through your computer. So just go to that link there and sign up, and you can get started with the free audio course there. Now, in this webinar, I'm going to be covering basic introduction to cosmetic formulating. And after completing this webinar, you should have a good idea of the steps required to formulate a beauty product from the start to the finished. Before I get started to the main talk, I would tell you a little bit. I think it'd be useful to tell you a little bit about me and how I got started formulating. Growing up, I had always had an interest in science, which led me to get a chemistry degree from DePaul University. And like a lot of people with science degrees, I literally had no idea what I wanted to do or even what I could do when I was finished. Now, college might do a good job of teaching you science, but they certainly don't do much to teach you about getting a job after college. Anyway, after doing a little research about the job market, got interviewed with a few companies and landed a formulation job at Alberto Culver. And I was only going to stay there a couple of years, but it turned out I actually like formulating and cosmetic science, and I ended up working for them for over 17 years as a formulation chemist making hair care and skincare products. Now, here are just a few of the brands that I worked on. Some of the formulas I created are still being sold under these brands. I know the Tresemme formula still looks pretty similar to the one that I put together. Formulas were expected. It was a nice job because formulas were expected to do everything from coming up with the formulas, testing them, scaling up. It was a lot of great work experience there at Alberto. Now, after being in the industry for a few years, I started writing articles in my spare time for trade journals like Cosmetics and Toiletries and Happy Magazine. And this eventually worked into a book deal, and we created this book, Beginning Cosmetic Chemistry. And it's still an industry standard today. It's pretty nice to have that. And then I turned that information into a continuing education course that's offered through the Society of Cosmetic Chemists. About 10 years ago, I learned how to create websites, and I launched a couple of websites in cosmetics. This is a consumer blog called The Beauty Brains, and we have a podcast related to that. Now, The Beauty Brains got turned into a few books, and then, Can You Get Hooked on Lip Balm was one of them. And that led to a few appearances in TV shows like The Dr. Oz Show and The Rachel Ray Show, and it really was a fun time indeed. Now, another site that I started was Chemist Corner. And of course, since you're here, you probably saw Chemist Corner. And if you're not on the Chemist Corner forum, it's a great place to go. We have over 9,000 members at the Chemist Corner forum, and we have thousands of discussions. So if you have a question about formulating and I don't answer it here, go to the Chemist Corner forum and you can get it answered there. Now, while I don't actively formulate as much as I used to, I want to let anyone know who's considering becoming a cosmetic chemist that, it's a great job. It's low stress. You get to invent products that people use. It requires creativity. You're constantly learning, and it's really a fun job to have. One of my favorite things about being a cosmetic chemist is you have an actual impact. People can walk down the aisles of a store and see products that you make, or people use them. There's a lot of chemists out there and scientists who spend years just in research labs, and nobody ever sees any results of their work, or they help just a tiny piece. But being a cosmetic chemist is great. Now, there's one more thing I want to do before I get to the main agenda. Back in 1998 or so, I came up with a 3-word mission statement to guide all of my presentations. So whenever I do a presentation, I try to hit at least each of these points. They are educate, inspire, and entertain. Now, just to ensure that I get at least one of these accomplished, I'm going to switch back to my live feed here. There we are. I'll switch back. And I've got these. And back. And so close. Well, that was the entertainment. All right, let's get on with the main section. Thanks again for coming. Incidentally, let me know if the slides, you can see them all right. There we go. All right. Let's get back to some cosmetic science. In this webinar, I'm going to take you through the many aspects of creating cosmetic products. I'll do that using a product as an illustration, and along the way, we're going to cover information about cosmetic industry, formulations, raw material, testing, and more. And if you stay to the end, I'm going to have a special offer for the practical cosmetic formulating course exclusively for people on this webinar. Now, there will be a question and answer session, so feel free to post the questions below as I present. It's a lot to cover in 40 minutes, but I'll do my best. So let's jump in. How do you make a cosmetic product? Incidentally, when I refer to cosmetic products, I'm talking about personal care products. Cosmetics are more than things like color cosmetics and lipsticks. Things like shampoos, body lotions, body washes, these are all considered cosmetics from regulatory agencies around the world. And if you put if you put it on your body to make yourself look better, then it's probably a cosmetics. Now, there are many aspects of creating a cosmetic product. As a cosmetic formulator, some of these will be more important to you than others. But to create a product, you need to consider the following. You need to consider the packaging, the claims, the marketing, and the distribution. These factors are all important for you to know, especially if you're going to be selling your own products. But from a formulating standpoint, here are the most important things to know. First, you want to know the raw materials. What do they do? How do you work with them? And where do you get them? Then you're going to want to know formula. What specific raw materials do you use and how much? Then you want to look for formula aesthetics. What does the product feel like? Does it smell like? Look like? You'll have to go through product safety, and if you're going to use these on people, you have to be able to prove that your products are safe. Finally, you need to know how long your formulas are going to be safe and effective, and this is done by a process called stability testing. We get into all these topics in more detail in the practical formulating course, but for this webinar, I'm going to focus specifically on creating the formula. So here are the 6 steps involved in that you follow to create a product. Step 1 is you get set up, and we'll talk about the equipment that you need. Step 2 is picking a benchmark. Whenever you're creating a formula, you have to figure out what you want that formula to look like and act like, and that's done by picking a benchmark. Step 3 is finding a starting formula, so getting a place to start. Step 4 is getting your raw materials, sourcing. Step 5 is making the prototypes, testing them, and then finally testing and refining them in step 6. Of course, if you want to sell the product, there's a lot more that you're going to have to do, but these are the primary things that you need to do to get the product made. All right, let's begin with step 1, getting set up. When you are hired as a cosmetic chemist out of college, you will typically start in a lab that already is equipped with all the things you need to make cosmetic products. This is one of the big advantages of working for a sizable company right out of college. But if you're hired with a startup or a small company or a consultant service, you might not be as well equipped. This is also true if you want to start your own cosmetic line or make products at a lab you set up in your home. So you may need to purchase equipment to get your lab set up to do the work of a formulator. But here is the basic equipment that you need. It includes containers, weighing equipment, mixers, heating and cooling equipment, lab supplies, testing equipment. Let's go through each of these in a little bit more detail. First, there's the containers. These are the ones that will hold your raw materials and your formulations. There are three primary containers that every cosmetic lab needs. These include raw material containers, product storage containers. Now, the exact things that you use for containers is going to depend on the nature of the material that you're storing. You'll need various glasses, glass jars of different sizes. You need plastic bottles. You might need a plastic bucket and pails. For making prototypes, you'll need things like glass beakers and stainless steel containers. The steel containers are good for making larger size batches. The biggest batch that you might make in a beaker, though, is probably 2 kilograms or 2 liters. Bigger than that, it's safer to use stainless steel containers. Incidentally, in science, we always work with a metric system, so I always talk in grams, kilograms, liters. So you just kind of get used to it over time. For all the Americans out there who still use the pounds and ounces system there. Now, for storing your products, you can use glass jars, but you may also use plastic bottles. But ultimately, whatever container you're putting your product in, that's the kind of packaging container you need. Okay, in addition to containers, you're going to need some weighing equipment to measure things that go in your ingredients. In a kitchen, you use things like cups and tablespoons, and the measurements are all done by volume. Now, this isn't the case in cosmetics. That's because you need something that is more accurate. So when you're making a formula, accuracy is the key to being able to repeat and make a consistent formula. And to be accurate, it's crucial that you have a scale. Now, a scale will accurately measure your ingredients, and there's a wide variety of scales available, and the cost range can be from really cheap to obscenely expensive. The exact scales that you get is really going to depend mostly on the size of the batches that you're making. Ideal cosmetic lab will have 3 types of scale: a small scale measurement, and this scale can measure things from 100 grams down to 0.001 gram. And this is good for measuring dyes and powders and other ingredients where you just want a small amount. There's a mid-range scale. This is a scale in which you use most often. It's going to be it's the most important one for you to get. It can measure ingredients from 2,000 grams down to about 0.01 gram with an accuracy of 0.01. For most anything that you can probably make, you can use this scale, especially if your batches are like 1,000 grams. When getting a scale for this purpose, you'll want to make sure it's accurate enough, but it's also durable enough to maintain its accuracy while it's being used a lot. Finally, for a large scale, scale is helpful if you're going to make batches that are larger than 2 kilograms. Then you're going to want to have a scale that can measure a lot higher. So to make batches, you should have a scale that might measure up to 10 kilograms. Although if you're making really large batches, for example, production size batches, you might even need a larger scale batch. But if with these scales, they're not as accurate. But if you're off by 2 grams in a 10,000 gram batch, that's not as important. All right, next up is your mixer. Mixers is one of the most important pieces of equipment when getting started to set up your lab. If you've done any searching on the internet, you'll probably have gotten advice that you can use a hand mixer or an immersion blender. And while this might be true, this is not really the proper way to make cosmetic products. Immersion blenders are fine for the kitchen or for making small prototypes. But if you are working with a standard cosmetic formula and you want to actually make serious products, then a center stir mixer is what you really want. They have interchangeable mixing blades and variable speeds. You see the picture I've got here. But the type of mixer you get really depends on the type of products that you're going to make. There are numerous types of cosmetic products that you can make, from liquids to gels to emulsions. And you want to have a mixer that's going to be versatile enough to handle as many different types of products that you make. Things to consider is the product viscosity. If you're going to be making really thick products like gels and creams, you'll need a mixer that has enough torque to move the solution. Stick blenders and magnetic stirrers will just not work for most cosmetic formula applications. Another thing to consider is the formula sample size. One of the things I see people doing wrong is that they make batches that are just too small. So even if you're going to make the product just for yourself, a 100-gram batch is really just too small for most purposes. This is because it's really difficult to weigh it to the right accuracy, but more important, it's difficult to get the proper mixing without incorporating too much air or getting little tiny fish eyes that don't go in. Air in batches is not good. Laboratory overhead mixers are designed to process up to a certain amount, usually specified in liters. Examples are the 35, 100, 150, or 200 liters. And since viscosity issues enter the equation in direct proportion to the volume, this must be also considered when picking a mixer. For most cosmetic labs, ideally you'll have two forms of mixers. One will be the overhead center stir mixer, and then one that works for batches that are 5,000 grams or less, and one that works for batches of 5 to 10 gallons. If you look at the different types of things that you're going to need, also you'll need maybe a homogenizer if you make a lot of emulsions, having paddle blades, and having clamps and stands and platforms. These are all things that you can equip yourself with. Now, next is the heating and cooling equipment. When you're making batches, often you'll have to heat the batch up. And so for this, you want to have a hot plate. Hot plates are the ceramic coated hot plates that can get up to, you need 200 degrees Celsius at least. Most cosmetic formulas are made at temperatures under 100 degrees Celsius. And so your heating thing doesn't have to go too hot. Also, you want to have a water bath so you can cool things down. Then there's the raw materials, other kinds of lab supplies that you want to get. So, of course, there's your raw materials, and obviously, you can't have a lab without having all the right raw materials on hand. So the exact raw materials you get is going to depend on the products that you're making. So if you're making hair care products, you need surfactants, suitable cosmetic raw materials for making cleansers. If you make skincare products, you're going to want emulsifiers and emollients. And so there's a wide variety of things that you need for that. Now, some of the basic raw materials that you should have in your lab, of course, water. A source of deionized or distilled water is pretty helpful. You don't really want to just use tap water. It's got too many ions in it. But having deionized or distilled water is good. Having colors, most cosmetics are colored, so having a supply of FD&C dyes can make it very helpful for you to change different colors of your formulas. Having surfactants like SLS or SLES are helpful. But if you formulate more naturally, then you want to have alkyl polyglucosides, desoglucoside, lauryl glucoside, that kind of thing. You want to have humectants, propylene glycol, and glycerin are pretty common. Oils, things like coconut oil, soybean oil, mineral oil, they're all very helpful to have on hand. Adjustment agents like citric acid, lactic acid, so some acids, some bases like sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, salts, sodium chloride, chelating agents like sodium EDTA. Also, all of these are very helpful to have. Also, it's helpful to have preservatives, and you need this for every formula that you make. You want to have fragrances, so you have a lot of good options of how to make your product smell better. And then thickeners, it's always helpful to have a way to thicken. Now, as I said, the exact type and amount of raw material that you have on hand is going to depend on the prototypes that you make most often. But most cosmetic labs are going to have a stock of each type of the ingredient listed there. As far as testing equipment, the last part of setting up your lab is getting the proper equipment. For most people, a pH meter will be key. For any formula you make that contains water, then you can use the pH measurement as an indication of your product quality. It's important to get a meter because things like pH strips, they're just not accurate enough to be useful for a cosmetic formulator. Viscometer is another piece of equipment useful for formulators. This device measures the thickness or rheology of a formulation, and it can give you an indication of whether your product is going to meet consumer expectations for thickness and whether the product is going to remain stable over time. The picture up here is a picture of a viscometer. Another useful bit of testing equipment are microbial test kits. These help you determine whether your products are free from microbial contamination and safe for sale. Ultimately, you want to send your samples out to an independent lab to make sure that your products are safe. But you can use these test kits in your lab to get a good idea if any particular batch is contaminated or not. Other useful things are hair trusses for testing hair products, a blender for testing foam, a corneometer for skin testing and moisturization, color swatches for matching colors, and for stability testing, having controlled temperature, and oven, and a light box are also very helpful. But when it comes to getting started, you should at least have a pH meter for your testing. Okay, so that's how you get set up with your formula. Next up is step 2, picking a benchmark. Now, whenever you get started with a new project, it's a great idea. Whenever you get started with a new project, it's a great idea to find an existing formula that will serve as your benchmark for your formulations. Typically, your marketing person will propose a benchmark for you, but you should also have your own benchmark that you try to outperform. Here are some of the guidelines on picking a cosmetic product benchmark and using it in formulation. First, before picking your benchmark, it's helpful to know what it is. A benchmark is an existing formula that has many of the same characteristics that you want your formula to emulate. So if you're knocking off a formulation, the benchmark is that formulation. Incidentally, if you're working with a cosmetic formulator, giving them a benchmark is the best way to ensure that you get the formula made the way that you want. So if you're a brand owner, that having a benchmark is the best way to get them to make the product the way you want. Some of the factors included in picking a benchmark is the performance. Best benchmark is the one that performs the best, and you should find on the market which product performs the best or to your satisfaction. When I was working on hair care products, the Pantene formula consistently scored highest on both our lab tests and consumer tests. And so we always made Pantene the benchmark formula. Another characteristic that you look at is aesthetics. For some products, the performance is not equivalent to the aesthetics. For example, a body wash could perform great on a foam test, but perform terribly on consumer evaluation. So therefore, you should find a benchmark that is aesthetically the strongest product on the market. And market popularity, while the best-selling product is not necessarily the best performing product, you still want to make sure that your new formulation performs at least as well as the most popular product on the market. It's popular for a reason, and some of that could be the performance. Now, once you pick the benchmark, you need to come up with a battery of tests to quantify how well it's going to perform. This will be highly dependent on the type of product that it is, but it should include a mix of lab tests and panel tests. When I was developing the Feek shampoo formula test, I ran tests like foam tests, and I did this with and without oil. I did a tress combing test. I did a tress wash test. I did panel tests. And this is just where you have a bunch of people try the product to get feedback. And then I used those scores from the test to set the benchmark levels for any prototype that I wanted to meet or exceed. So benchmarks are a great way to help guide your formulations and also show data to your bosses that the formula you created is every bit as good as the competition. You should use a benchmark for every formula that you create. All right, next is finding the starting formula. Remember, there are 6 steps, so we're halfway through the steps here. Creating new cosmetics is what cosmetic formulators are hired to do. But if you're new to the cosmetic industry or you have concentrated on one specific area, you probably haven't had the chance to formulate many different types of cosmetics. So what do you do when you're asked to create a formula that you never made before? You find a good starting formula. Now, while you could just start from scratch and combining cosmetic raw materials in different proportion to see what you get, this really isn't the best way. The best way is finding a starting formula that somebody else has previously created, and then you can modify it for your needs. Unfortunately, if you don't know where to look, finding starting formulas isn't easy, but here's some sources. Chemical suppliers. One of the most helpful things that raw material suppliers do is create starting formulas. Of course, these formulas are usually packed with high amounts of the supplier's ingredients, but they are an excellent place to start. A couple of suppliers who have good starting formulas are Croda and Stepan. For home crafters, makingcosmetics.com, they have some good starting formula options. But just remember, a starting formula is just that. It's not an ending formula. It's just a place to get started. You can also get formulas from patents. The big companies love to patent as many formulas as they can. Now, this prevents other people from selling an exact duplicate of their formulas. Fortunately, it also gives, it requires them to publish some version of the formulas that they're patenting. And this makes an excellent source for starting formulas. You can search US patents by going to the uspto.gov website, or even just go to Google patents to search. Of course, you have to change the formula if you ever want to launch it, but this is a great place to start. And then there are some starting books. These are some of the books that I found most helpful for finding formulas: Harry's Cosmeticology, the Handbook of Cosmetic Science and Technology, the Chemistry and Manufacture of Cosmetics, and Google Books actually has a number of cosmetic science and formulation books. And so take a search through Google Books. Then there are trade journals and online sources. Happy.com has a great formulary. Cosmetics and Toiletries has a cosmetic bench reference that you can get access for free. And then UL Prospector, they have a ton of supplier starting formulas. So you can get a lot of great starting formulas there. Another place that you can get a starting formula, if you really can't find a good starting formula for the specific product you're making, then getting an ingredient list of an existing product is also a great way to get started. You get the ingredient list, then you make a guess at the relative concentration and find out that 1% line that I talked about way at the start. And then you make prototypes and you refine and you refine. You know, we go through exactly how to start with a starting an ingredient list, and then figuring out, you know, what are the most important ingredients and how do you turn that into a formula. And really, there you have it. Some great sources for finding starting formulas. Remember that starting formulas are always just that. It's just a place to start. You'll always have to modify any formula that you get from these sources. For example, if you copy a formula from a patent, you have to modify it significantly if you're going to try to sell it. Now, if you try out a supplier's formula, you're often going to have to find that it doesn't exactly work, or it's not stable exactly the way it's listed. But once you get started, that's when the art of cosmetic formulation begins. There really is no substitute for just making batches and testing them out. Incidentally, here's an example spreadsheet of a formula. You can see here. I always work from a spreadsheet which lists the amount of the ingredients needed in terms of percentages, and you can get that spreadsheet for free right at that link right there. All right, we ready to go on to the next step in formulating cosmetics? Step 4, getting your raw materials. Now, when I worked at a company, it was pretty easy to just get raw materials I needed for making cosmetic formulas. I would just look up a raw material, contact the salesperson that I knew from a company, and then just ask for a sample. And within a day or two, I'd have a sample waiting for me. And if it was a material that my company already used, we had a few thousand in inventory, I could just contact our ingredient people and then get a sample. It was actually much more complicated than that, but you know, I knew I could get samples from the warehouse. However, now that I don't work for a corporation and am independent, it's much more challenging to get raw materials. In fact, it's much more challenging to even find them. But if you are going to be a cosmetic formulator, you'll need to have sources for all the raw materials that you might want to use. So here is what you need to know about learning about obtaining new raw materials. In the Practical Cosmetic Formulating course, we go through all of that information directly. All right, before you can get the raw materials, though, you have to know which of the raw materials you need to get. So learning about the specific raw materials and what they do is one of the most important things to be as a formulator. And actually, I'm working on a new course where I just go through raw materials specifically. It's just going to be a raw material course, and look for that to come out in the spring. Now, there are over 22,000 raw materials listed in the latest INCI dictionary, and you can pretty much use any of them in your cosmetic formulas. The number is actually higher because for every material listed in the dictionary, there are multiple suppliers who make materials with different trade names, so you want to narrow down your selection there. You can do this first by learning about the different types of cosmetic raw materials. And then next, you can review things like a buyer's guide. A buyer's guide is a listing of all the companies that sell raw materials. The most useful buyer's guides that I found, the Happy's buyer guide at happy.com, the PC buyer's guide. This lists suppliers of over 3,800 raw materials. Special Chem for Cosmetics. They have an INCI directory. It's an excellent source of raw material information. And then UL Prospector, another great source for information. Now, you can also learn about raw materials at trade shows, and the best ones would be the Suppliers Day in New York, and that happens in May of this year. Actually, I'm going to be there teaching a course, so that would be May 6th this year. In Cosmetics for outside the United States, In Cosmetics does some great shows, and you can find raw materials there. So getting the raw materials, once you've figured out what the raw materials you want are, you can get started to get samples. Now, if you work for a big company, as I said, it's just a matter of contacting a supplier and getting a sample. They'll actually send it pretty fast. But if you don't work for a big company, it's a little harder. Your best bet is to develop a relationship with the salesperson for the company that makes the product that you want to test. And this can be done at like an SEC meeting or through LinkedIn. If this doesn't work, you can search Google for distributors of the raw material and ask for samples or buy samples. And they may just send you something. If getting samples doesn't work, you'll have to buy the product. You can often buy from the supplier, from a distributor, or you can find raw materials online. Even eBay and Amazon have some. The website Making Cosmetics has a lot of raw materials in there. Incidentally, I have no connection with makingcosmetics.com. I just they come up in a lot of searches, and I've heard good things about them. I don't know anything much more about them. All right, the next step in formulating is making your prototypes. Here is where you get into the lab. You start mixing raw materials together. Follow the manufacturing procedures so you know what order to add the ingredients. So this does matter. And you'll also want to have your mixer going the whole time to blend the ingredients together. If there isn't a procedure that came with the formula, here's some basic procedures that works with most formulas. Start with the largest volume ingredient and then add the soluble powders next. Then begin heating the formula to a point higher than the melting point of any solid ingredient that you might add. As it heats, then you can add the soluble, non-heat sensitive liquid ingredients. Then at the target temperature, then you can add your ingredients. You hold for 20 minutes while mixing, and then you can start cooling. And then when the temperature gets below about 40 C, then you can add the heat-sensitive ingredients like the fragrance and the preservatives, and then you cool to room temperature and stop mixing. Of course, the basic procedure will vary widely depending on the exact formulation, but that's a basic one. But here are some things to consider. First, the batch size. As a formulator, one of the most common decisions that you have to make is how large of a batch you're going to make. So first, answer, why are you making it? There are a number of reasons why you might make a batch, but the primary one includes prototype development, prototype testing, consumer testing, scale up, and then for production. Generally, each of these are going to require a different size batch. So for a new prototype, you can shoot for about 400 grams. I don't like to make batches that are much smaller than 400 grams because of weighing errors. But I could see how some people would want to make less because if you bought a raw material, it can be expensive to make prototypes. So I say 400 grams, but certainly don't go smaller than 100 grams. Now, if you're doing prototype testing, you're going to want a batch that's at least 1,000 grams. That'll give you a lot of enough material for doing whatever test you're going to do: press testing, foam testing, moisturization testing, that kind of thing. If you're doing consumer testings, these require full-size bottles, and the smallest consumer test is approximately 30 people, but it's not uncommon for some of these tests to go for 100 people or more. And then so that means you need batch sizes of anywhere from 5 gallons to 50 gallons. Now, often you also make extra samples to run concurrent stability testing with these types of batches. In fact, you can also use this batch to do your scale-up testing. For some manufacturers, you won't actually make batches just to test the scale-up formulation. Your scale-up batch is really your production size batch, 500 or 50 to 300 gallons. But if you work for a big company, you often have to make a scale up test before you move on to production size, which can be 2,000 to 5,000 gallons. And for these types of batches, you really do not have to make extra, because of even a small percentage is a substantial amount. Final thoughts: before you make any batch, you need to think about how much you need and calculate out exactly the amount that you want to make. For smaller batches, make more than you need, of course. Also, measure as precisely as possible. But for larger batches, you don't have to worry as much about exact measurements. A larger batch size means that small measuring errors will have less impact. Now, there are a variety of prototyping skills that you need to develop as a formulator. Some of these include developing new formulas, evaluating raw materials, finding cost savings, finding replacement materials, improving your manufacturing, doing more specific scale-ups, and more. These are the types of skills that we teach in the Practical Cosmetic Formulating course. We can't cover all of that right here, but hopefully, as a formulator, eventually you develop those skills. All right, the last step, testing your prototypes. When you finish your batch, you need to test for standard quality control measures. And for most personal care products, this includes pH and viscosity. You'll also do a color check and an odor check. And if these basic characteristics are off a little bit, then you can just adjust the batch until it comes within specifications. After letting the batch equilibrate overnight, you run some standard tests. So some of the tests you do, pH, viscosity. You want to do stability testing. We've done a whole webinar on stability testing and microbial testing. Your products have to be safe for use, and you have to prove they're safe. You have to demonstrate they don't grow microbes. But knowing how to test cosmetics ensures that you make high quality, safe, stable, and legal products. So here's the 6-step summary. First, getting started, we talked about what kind of equipment you need to set up to get started. We talked about picking a benchmark and having a target for your formulations. We talked about where you can find starting formulas and how you can come up with those. We talked about learning about raw materials and then where you might get raw materials. We also talked about some tips for making prototypes and getting a procedure for doing that. Then we talked a little bit about testing and refining. And if you're curious, the FDA has put together some GMPs. So if you're setting something up and you want to follow the best practices for good manufacturing procedures, go to this link here from the FDA. And it's a useful information sheet and explains everything you need to know about following GMPs for making cosmetics on a small scale. All right, I hope you've been posting your questions, and I'm going to get to them shortly. But first, let me tell you a little bit about our Practical Cosmetic Formulating course, which you can sign up now by clicking the link below. I'm not sure if the link is showing, but if it's not, you can go to, let me see what we have here. One second. Go to okay, I'm going to get to your questions here. Hope you put those there. So when I first started out in formulating cosmetic industry, I had the benefit of working with a seasoned formulator, and I had access to extensive formulation libraries. But I know most people are not in that situation, and that's why I created the Practical Cosmetic Formulating course. It can be taken by anyone: science majors, industry chemists, cosmetic entrepreneurs, formulators, salespeople, and it can be done at any time, completed anytime and anywhere. I try to make it very flexible. By completing the course, you're going to know how to create nearly every kind of cosmetic formula. We cover a ton of different types, from skincare, hair care, color cosmetics, just a number of formulation types and the science behind them. It's a 9-module course, and we have modules on Formulating product development, the whole cycle. We talk about cosmetic science. There's a whole module on that. We go through raw materials in a single module, the different types of formulations from powders to gels to solutions, emulsions. We go through lab techniques and prototyping. We talk about a whole thing on scale up, going from the lab to production scale. And we do a whole section on product testing. Another benefit is that you get any kind of formulation question answered. So if you are going through the course, part of the course, and you had a question about any kind of formulation, you just send me a question and I'll be happy to answer it. There are additional resources in the course. We have free bonus books and videos, and then you get access to some free webinars. There's a webinar on preservation, on regulations. We're going to be adding to that this year. And if you complete all the quizzes and modules, you get a free certificate of completion, and you can learn in any way that's best for you. Lessons are available in audio, video. You can even study while you travel. Now, I have had a passion for teaching since I got into the business. I started writing. I created the Beginning Cosmetic Chemistry book, and so I just love teaching. I do these webinars. And we teach people with students from all types of backgrounds and people from around the world. You heard we've had actually we just had our 1,000th person go through the course. So we've had a lot of people. Here's some things that people say. I think the training course is great, covers a wide range of topics, and is organized with streaming videos, PowerPoints, and formula files. Jill says, highly recommend the class. I would personally recommend the class to anyone who wants to learn not only about formulating, but the industry in general. Eric said, I'm learning a lot of new things. They just don't cover this stuff in school. And as a webinar special, you can go to this link here, webinar-special. And if you sign up today, you get a free 15-minute one-on-one call when you sign up. You also have a lifetime access to the material. Some people have material that expires. We don't expire ever. So once you sign up, you'll have access to the material and any kind of updates we do to the course in the future. That it's locked in and you always have access. I also have a money back guarantee. If you start the course and it's just not right for you, or there's something you don't like about it, just ask me for a refund and I'd be happy to do that. And also, if you go through the webinar special, there's a payment plan. Normally, we don't do payment plans, but for this special course, we're going to have that. So go to that link right there and check it out today. All right, that's it now. Now on to some questions. Hopefully, you've been putting some questions along the way. All right. There I am again. I think I'm gonna wear my glasses so I can actually read the screen. Sometimes I take those off. Maybe I don't. I'm gonna leave them on. All right. I hope you found that helpful. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and thank you so much. So let's take a look at some of these questions. All right, just to give you an idea, we have 79 questions that came in. So I'm not sure I'll get to all of them, but I'll get to as many as I can. All right, here was a question from Jackie. I'm most interested in making basic formulations containing salicylic acid, SLS-free shampoos, between 1% and 4%. So I hope to learn a few new things here. Okay. So no question there, but yes, hopefully you found out some info there. Probably most helpful would be finding a benchmark for your that uses salicylic acid in the formula, and then trying to copy from there. There's a question from James. Do you ever get chemists coming from the inks, paints, and coatings to the cosmetic industry, or the other way around? It's similar industry in that both require formulating and a knowledge of raw materials, but the coatings industry is more about the films and polymers and getting pigments to stick. So there isn't a lot of overlap, although I would say there should be a lot of the same raw material suppliers. I'm not aware of a lot of coatings chemists going either way. But if you have skills in coatings, you certainly have a lot of the same skills that are required for formulating cosmetics. Thanks for that question. Okay, we've got Georgia asks, love to hear your opinion on heat and holding the water phase for 20 minutes, killing microorganisms in lotion instability. Yeah, I've seen that advice that you should heat the water phase for 20 minutes to kill off any microbes. Yeah, you need to use a preservative to kill off the microbes. That heating might help. It might reduce the number, but it certainly isn't going to kill all the spores. And unless you're boiling your water and pasteurizing it, it's not an effective matter. And either way, even if it is effective at killing off all the microorganisms, you still need to use preservatives to keep your products microbial free in the future. Preservatives are used not just for creating contamination free products, but also for any future problems that might happen. Microbes are all around us. They get into our products, and you need to have a preservative in there to stop your products from becoming contaminated. All right, thanks for that question. Let's see what we got here. Another question. Here's a question from Tim. What are your thoughts and advice on formulating products with CBD, I can't say cannabinoids, that kind of oil, primarily creams, ointments? I don't really know what advice you're looking for. It's a very popular ingredient, CBDs, being incorporated into topical skin products. I would say that you can't make any claims about it because any kind of claims that you would make about CBD or effectiveness are going to be drug claims. So if a product gets into there and it interacts with the cannabinoid system, that would make the product a drug. So unless you're going to make drug claims, you just want to avoid making drug claims. So it really depends. The way you formulate it would depend on what type of claims are you making, what kind of product are you making, and what kind of safety testing are you doing. It's a challenging time right now. There are products out there. There are people doing it. The FDA hasn't really weighed in on it. But if it becomes popular enough, certainly the FDA is going to weigh in on it. And for at the moment, you can use cannabinoids in the similar way of other types of oils. You can put them in emulsions. You need to use solubilizers to get them to stay stable. I would recommend using polymeric emulsifiers because they help with the stability. But that's mostly what I have to say on it now. Thank you. All right, I'm just going to remind you that this is the Chemist Corner Cosmetic Science webinar. We just had it. Now I'm just answering questions. I'm Perry Romanowski, and I'm going through and answering your questions. Feel free to post your questions below if you have any, and I'll continue to answer for another 10 or 15 minutes here. Let's see. Here's one from Carolina. I make skincare on a small scale at home, but I do wish to upscale. Do I need an overhead stir or homogenizer to create emulsions? And what should be like the minute and torque to create an emulsion of viscous emulsifier? We actually have a whole list of specifically recommended equipment, mixers in particular, in our forum. So I'd recommend you go to chemistcorner.com/forum and just look up in the resources section. There's a whole list of different types of equipment to get there. But yes, I would say you should have an overhead stirrer or a homogenizer if you're going to create emulsion products and you want to scale up. Doing things on a small scale is just different than doing it on a larger scale. And if you're going to go on a larger scale, you need proper equipment to do that. All right, thanks for that question there. Amar says, is there a way to add alcohol extract to oils like jojoba oil? Yeah, you just need to find the proper proper solubilizer to get alcohol and ethanol to mix with jojoba oil, but it is possible to create something like that. There's a question from Nicole. Nicole says, if I was going to make an emulsifier-free formulation, what could I put alongside soy lecithin and gum to keep it stable? Well, the thing is, lecithin is an emulsifier, so it's not really emulsifier-free. So I don't really know about that. But if you're using xanthan gum, as that's the gum you're talking about, that will help to keep it stable. The reality is, if you want to keep it stable, I would say you could also use something like an acrylate polymer, like a carbomer. That's going to do a better job of keeping your particles suspended. But you also need a good homogenization. Making very small particles will help to stabilize that too. There isn't like some magic ingredient you can put in and it just makes it stable. I'd have to see the rest of the formula, but like I said, lecithin is kind of an emulsifier, but that's a marketing thing there. All right, next question. Here's a question from Aofi. Is there an ingredient that will allow a shimmer eyeshadow to apply better, more pigmented when applied with a brush? When I swatch and apply with fingers, it appears opaque, but when I apply with a brush, it applies like sheer glitter. And the formula that I'm using is zinc stearate, etc. So this is an interesting question. There isn't some specific ingredient that you can use. It's a combination really of, I'm sorry, I was just looking up. I had already answered this one. It's a combination. You need a good polymer for a film forming, and you need a silicone. You have cyclopentasiloxane. You might try something like a dimethicone or an amodimethicone, which will blend a bit better. And those are the kinds of things that will help in that regard. All right, next question. Azuzur asks, how can we determine how many preservatives and which preservatives we should use to have and how much? Well, the way you determine the preservative is you have to look at your raw materials and see if there's any conflicting raw materials with the preservative you want to make. For example, polysorbates don't play well with something like parabens. Clays are difficult to work with. So you have to consider these things. You have to consider the kind of raw materials that are in there. If you have a lot of natural ingredients, you need a higher level of preservative because there's a higher level of microbes to start out with. The type of preservative you use will depend on your performance, your formula, but also a little bit on your marketing story. It used to be people would just use either DMDM hydantoin or formaldehyde donors and or parabens. And now if marketing is a consideration, you go to organic acids or something like phenoxyethanol, or you're getting certified. So there's a whole lot of things to consider. There's no simple answer to that. But so how do you determine how many preservatives? You should use a preservative that's broad spectrum, that typically you're going to have a fungicide, a bacterial side, and something that works on molds and yeasts. So you want to have 2 or 3 preservatives usually. Usually you also want to have a chelating agent in there. How much you use depends on your formula. So, okay. Next question. Thanks for all these questions. So we got a few more questions left here. All right. Here's a question from Milton. In a formula where one product dissolves in another, as the lack of volume that is lost, instead the solution is compensated. So how do you make the formula balance? Well, It's a question about volume. Whenever you're doing formulating, you should be formulating in terms of mass and not volume. So measuring everything, even your liquids, you should measure in terms of grams. Then you don't have to worry about your volume or your density adjustments. So hopefully that answers that question. Here's a question from Gisera. How do I reverse engineer a product that I want to add an active ingredient to? Now, this really depends, again, on what the product is. For some things, you could just add the active ingredient to the formula. The change in the mass is not going to affect the overall formula very much. For other things, though, if it's an emulsion, it's just a little more complicated. You'd have to get the ingredient list, identify the crucial ingredients, get the percent solids, check the pH, then guess at a starting formula. Then you can make your prototypes where you include the active ingredient, then adjust the formula for initial expectation. So essentially, as I described, knocking off a formula. But this is really, it's not really just a simple thing. It's a whole project. Here's a question from Tiona. Is there a database or reference widely available to formulators that shows which ingredients mix well together and which ones are going to create unwanted compounds? And the answer to that is no, not really. There are some rules of thumbs that you learn kind of along the way. For example, generally anionic surfactants are not going to mix well with cationic surfactants. They make insoluble salts. Some preservatives can be rendered less effective when combined with non-ionic surfactants like polysorbates. Clays can make some preservatives ineffective. Acids and bases don't generally mix depending on your different concentrations. Salts in emulsions can destabilize them. These are just kind of things that you learn along the way. There isn't a specific database source for that, though. Scene asks, is pH tested products, is just testing a product for pH enough to declare it's safe? No, simply testing the pH of your product, that's not enough to say that your product is safe. You also need to do microbial testing to ensure that it's not contaminated. And you need to do testing at different temperatures and conditions and over time. That's going to mimic what the formula might experience out in the marketplace. And that's done through stability testing. Here's a question from Christopher. Christopher is from Poland. He said, I invented a hair cap mask that is a hair conditioner, but enriched with the plant stem cells. And I showed it at Cosmetic Las Vegas. And I want to know, how would the FDA classify a product with stem cells? Is it a cosmetic or is it an OTC? It's also registered in the EU as a cosmetic. Well, indeed, Christopher mentioned Poland. Indeed, my father is from Poland. My mother's not from America, but my dad was right from Poland. But whether something is considered a drug or a cosmetic really depends on a couple of factors. But the main thing is, what are the claims that you're making about the product? If you're going to say that your product makes your hair look and feel beautiful, then it's just a cosmetic, and you can put stem cells in there. That's not a problem, or stem cell lysates. But if you're going to say that the stem cells stimulate hair growth or make some other kind of drug claim, then it's going to be considered a drug by the FDA. You can't have living tissue in your product either. So if you want to call it a cosmetic, you can't really have stem cells that are living in there. You'd actually have to have lysates, which are chopped up stem cells, and not an actually living organism. So hopefully that helps there. Well, we got a few more questions here. This one from Chimmy. What is the most important test to do in order to ensure the stability of any cosmetic product? I would say conducting a stability test, put the formula at different temperatures and lighting conditions, and then measure the changes over time. Also test for microbial contamination over time to ensure that the product remains free from microbial growth. Now, depending on the type of product or the pH or the viscosity and odor and appearance, these should all be observed over time when doing a stability test. All right, we got time for a few more questions. James says, for a novice, you list quite a few pieces of test equipment, pH, viscosity. Can you give an estimate of the cost of these? For a pH meter, for example, you can get a pH meter for anywhere from $50 to, $500. I would, if you're just starting out, I would go for the lower priced pH thing. Viscometer, you could find a Brookfield viscometer through Amazon for a few $100s, but a new one would cost a few $1,000s. So depends on that. You don't necessarily need a corneometer just starting out, but if you're going to make claims about moisturization, then you're going to need that kind of stuff eventually. Corneometer, I think you can get a few $100s, but I don't know specifically the pricing for a lot of these things. But essentially, when you're setting up testing equipment, the most important ones to get are the pH and the viscometer for your QA testing. For your claims testing, that kind of thing, you'll be limited in the claims you make until you get the equipment and you can do the testing. Okay, hopefully that helps there. Here's a question from Lourdes. I'm an analytical perfumer. As such, I need to know about the composition of personal care products, household products, to be able to extract the fragrances from them. My question is, how do I know about the solubility of the products? Like, what solvent is best to use for extraction? Do I use hexane, pentane, and any other solvent that will help me to extract the fragrances without extracting too much base? Thank you. That's a challenge. I don't think there's any single answer to that, and I don't think you can necessarily get all of the fragrance molecules out of a formula, and so that's a challenge. I know one of the ways that we kind of knocked off things is we would make, say, an alcoholic solution of a product, run it through a mass spec and a GC, identifying peaks, and then have to guess from there. So I'm sorry, there's no specific answer for every single product. It really depends on the product and and it also depends on what ingredients are in the fragrance that you use. You probably have to do a variety of different ones and then build the fragrance from there. We have a bunch of questions here. Here's a question from Tita. I have a chemistry background. I'm really interested in detailed mechanisms applied when making cosmetic products. Can you recommend a resource that really elaborates on the principles of chemistry, including detailed reaction mechanisms applied when making cosmetics? Well, it's a great question, Tita, and so some of those books that I mentioned, The Chemistry and Manufacture of Cosmetics, that will have some detailed information. Harry's Cosmeticology will have some more detailed information. But let me be realistic here about the cosmetic industry. While we talk about cosmetic chemistry, the reality is it's much more of an applied science than a thoroughly studied science. There are certainly papers. Journal of the Society of Cosmetic Chemists has papers all the time. The IFSCC Journal of Cosmetic Chemists has papers also. But a lot of the information that you have is more practical information about mixing things together. There isn't a lot of chemistry in cosmetic chemistry, it turns out. Formulating is a little different than raw material creation, for example, because you mix things together. When you're in organic chemistry, for example, you mix all these chemicals together and you want to see chemical reactions and percent efficiency of the reaction and conversion. In cosmetic chemistry, we mix all these chemicals together and we hope that there are no reactions. Reactions are typically a bad thing in a formula. And so there aren't a lot of detailed chemistry books and publications about cosmetics. And another thing about it is that these things haven't really been looked at. On an industrial side, when you're an industrial chemist, you don't have time to look into the details and the reaction mechanisms and the like about raw materials and about your more complicated colloidal solution that you put together. So it's very very complicated. There isn't a single book. There's lots of piecemeal things. Like I said, the Chemistry and Manufacture of Cosmetics has some great information. Harry's Cosmeticology, another source of great information. Kirk Othmer has a formulation of cosmetics textbook. But I think you might be surprised to find out how much information is unknown about these things. And there's lots of great research projects that could be done. Debbie asks, the bonus is only available for the course if you pay in full. No, you get started on the payment plan, you can get the bonuses also. Erica says the link doesn't work. So sorry, if the link doesn't work, it's technology. All you have to do is go to chemistcorner.com/webinar-special, and you can get the link there. This is why I'm a chemist. I'm not a online marketer, because I can't even do a simple thing like a link. I'll get the link fixed. Here's a question from Andrea. What should the pH of a cosmetic product be? Well, Andrea, there's no single answer to that. It really depends on what the product is. It depends on what's in the product, but there's a whole range of answers. For hair conditioners, for example, your pH should be anywhere from 3.5 to 5.5. Depends on what's in there. For shampoos, your pH would be 5 to 6, but for baby shampoos, it would be 7. For lotions, the pH range could be anywhere from 5 to 7. 5 to 6. It really depends on what the formula is. Typically, cosmetic products in general will have a slightly acidic pH, and this is mostly because your skin has a slightly acidic environment. That's the microbes like to have that. Okay, well, I see it's 2 o'clock. I mean, it's 3 o'clock actually for Eastern. It's the top of the hour, or past the top of the hour. I've got a few more questions I'll keep answering, but thank you everyone for attending. We'll do this again next month. I'll let you know what the topic is going to be next month. But if you have some suggestions for topic, feel free to let me know. If you weren't able to join the course, just contact me via email. I'll send you the link, and we can work it out. I apologize. The link should work, but I don't always have this thing work out perfectly. Thanks again, and I will see you next time. Now, let's get back to some of these questions. Let's see. Toya says, how do you make an aqueous infusion like Kinky Girl Gel that uses marshmallow root, raw marshmallow root? I don't specifically know that product. I'd have to look it up, but I'll answer that on the side. But typically, to tell you what really happens, probably for a product like this, the raw marshmallow root is probably an aqueous solution of raw marshmallow, or it's in propylene glycol, and they make a standard curling gel using carbomer and water, and then put in a little marshmallow root as a hero ingredient or something to talk about. It doesn't actually have an impact on the formula, but I'll have to take a look at it more specifically. Nicole says, what's a good place to start acquiring lab equipment? You can get a lot of lab equipment right through Amazon or various sources. So you can go through eBay and start getting equipment too. We have go to our forum, and you can see some resource section to see some of the places that are suggested there. Patty says, what can I substitute for SCI? Sodium cocoa isoethionate. I'd need to see the rest of the formula for that. You can substitute maybe some other surfactant. Sodium lauryl sulfate would be great, but maybe there's some reason you're not using that. But it depends on what else you're using. Maybe you could use sodium cocoa sarcosinate, something like that. I'd have to see the rest of the formula. Claire says, how important is the bleeding testing for color pigments? Well, it depends on if it's a problem for your formula. So it can be very important depending on just the specific product that you put together, the quality control product. It's a matter of quality control, and because if your product is bleeding when it's say it's on the lips and it's, coming down on the face, well, that's not a good thing. So it really depends on the product and whether you have a problem. So if you have a problem with it, you should do that kind of testing. If you're making claims about it, then you have to do that testing too. Maggie says, what do you think of hydroquinone for correcting dark spots and pigmentation? Hydroquinone is the probably the best active ingredient for correcting dark spot pigmentation. It's actually approved in the US as a over-the-counter drug. You can use it up to 2%. In Europe, it's approved as a drug also. It's not approved as an over-the-counter product or a cosmetic product, so you can't get it there unless you get a doctor's prescription. But it's an ingredient that has a lot of proof behind it, and it works better than all the other options that are out there, despite what some people will tell you, arbutin or vitamin C. There are lots of things out there that are tested and suggested for being color correction or skin color corrections, but really the gold standard is still hydroquinone. Yeah. All right, we'll just have a few more questions here. Taylor says, do natural preservatives work? Well, it depends on what you mean by a natural preservative. So there are a lot of ingredients that call themselves natural preservatives that can be made to work. But the reality is that there's nothing that is actually natural that works well enough as a preservative to be used as the sole preservative in a cosmetic. And even the things that work under natural standards like EcoCert or Cosmos, or even from the environmental working groups, natural standards, those, like the organic acids and things, while they might exist in nature, they are all synthetically produced when you buy them. So they're not actually natural either. So there are preservatives that work under that are under natural standards that works. But I would say if you went out in nature and got ingredients, there's nothing that's going to work as a preservative well enough for a cosmetic product. All right, just a couple of more questions. How can I prevent rancidity of oils in my formula aside from using antioxidants? Nicole asked that. You could do some packaging, the way you package it, keep it in an opaque bottle, light-free bottle. You could also reduce the amount of oil in your product. And you could use oils that don't have double bonds, because oils that are unsaturated are the ones that eventually will go rancid. So those are some options, but using an antioxidant is usually the best option. All right. We're going to finish this up with one more question here. Thank you so much. This question comes to us from ME. Me. Not me, but ME. It says, what temperatures do you usually run stability at? Good question. Stability is a run at, first there's a refrigerated sample, so 4 degrees Celsius. That's our control. Then we run at room temperature, so usually about 25 C. Then there's a sample at accelerated, like 37 degrees C, 35 to 37 degrees C. Then there's a even more accelerated, 45 C. And then you also put it at ultraviolet light and artificial sunlight. And so those are the primary conditions to run stability tests at. Okay, that brings us to the end of this month's webinar. Thank you again so much for joining us. I'm Perry Romanowski from chemistcorner.com, and I look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thanks a lot, everyone.